I'd like to introduce the speaker today, John Kaufman. John's career was with the Oregon Department of Energy, where he worked with energy efficiency, renewable energy, and climate change. And a couple years ago, he presented a talk about climate change to us. And he also has very wide interests, including many aspects of philosophy and science. And I also want to give a big shout out. He is our only curriculum committee member who does natural science. He schedules all our natural science talks, as well as others in applied science, humanities, and social science. So he's a very treasured member of our committee. So today he's going to speak about, as you can read, near-death experiences, and he says it is not related to our age. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Let's see, turn this on. Yeah, thank you for coming. I'm on the science committee. As you can see, this is a very closely related topic to science. I needed a diversion, get away from it for a second. So, a couple disclaimers before we get started. First of all, as Vicki said, this is not about age. It is not about our age. Secondly, it is not about spiritualism, supernaturalism, paranormal, the occult. It is not about any of that kind of stuff. So hopefully you didn't come to hear that. Second disclaimer, I am not an expert in this. I could make a lot of mistakes. When time for questions, I'm going to ask for a lot of leniency because I am not an expert. There are individual areas within what I'm going to talk about that people may know a lot more than I know. So this could be a little bit disjointed. It could be contradictory. I may contradict myself. And my conclusions, I probably won't satisfy anyone. I have been hesitant to want to even make this talk because of the nature of the talk. And it can sound, to those of you who are scientifically oriented, a lot of my friends who are scientifically oriented, this could sound like a lot of woo-woo. And for those who are more religiously oriented, you know, it could sound pretty heretical. So I'm trying to, you know, not even like straddle the line. It's like what it is what it is, and that's what you get. So hopefully at least it will be fun and interesting. Okay, so what got me interested in this stuff? You know, why am I up here talking about it? I had an experience when I was a young man, 20-ish. I had gone through some pretty tough time, as a lot of us have, but I was kind of spinning out, I guess you'd say. And things just seemed kind of absurd and meaningless to me. I wouldn't say I was depressed, it was just absurd, and it was getting overwhelming. And I was at the point where I considered doing the worst. And as I considered it, and I was getting pretty close to doing it, something happened. And I started spinning into a tunnel. And I came out of the tunnel, and the rest is history. And I will get into what that involves in the rest of the talk here. It was the most profound experience of my life. And it has been something that I think about, not every day, but I think about it very, very frequently. If not weekly, at least monthly, and probably more like weekly or so. I just think about it. And coming and talking to you, like I say, was hard. I have not talked to other people about this because of the nature of it. You start to explain what happened to you, and they look at you like, what in the hell are you talking about? And so I have been very reluctant to talk about it over the years. Finally, at 77 years old, I figured, what the hell? So I've worked on it for a long time, and here's what we get. So what I'll start by saying what it is not. It is not just a close call with death, although that is perhaps what I had. I do not say that I had a near-death experience. I pretend that I say it was a near-death experience. But what is it not? It is not just that close call. It is not a frightening incident, which could provide great relief, could provide people with a second chance. It may be very profound, but it is not necessarily mystical. So then what is a near-death experience? Well, technically, the person is clinically dead. They do not register a heartbeat. They are not respiring. There's no breath. They're not breathing. It is accompanied by an intense subjective experience, joy, bliss, and awe. It is an experience, they have an experience of communion with reality. That is how it is often described. They have feelings of transcendence and metaconsciousness, and it is almost universally described by people who go through this as the most significant experience of one's life. It starts usually with a tunnel experience, as I described. You go through some kind of a tunnel. You're like, and it's a dark tunnel. I mean, here it's kind of light, but it's kind of dark, and I felt nauseous. It's kind of how it started. You just feel kind of nauseous. And you spin through this tunnel. And you emerge into the brightest light you've ever seen. And it is just everywhere. It is, you are immersed in it. It's not like you're seeing it. You are immersed in the light. It is accompanied by a sensation of unconditional love, of immense joy, immense bliss, and awe. You get a sense of oneness with the universe. You feel like you are a part of the universe. It is a part of you. You are a part of it. There is no separation. You feel associated with that, I mean closely related to that, is you feel a sense of interconnectedness. To use Thich Nhat Hanh's word, interbeing. You inter-are with everything in the universe. Everything is related to everything else. From it flows, and in my case, I believe it flows into a deep sense of ecology. I wound up, as a result of it, getting into energy, getting into environmental issues, getting into ecological type issues, how everything is tied together. You have a feeling of the sacredness of being alive. You love life, sacredness of being alive. You have a deep understanding. People recall a deep understanding of what life is all about. It's like they understand the meaning of life, whatever that is. And again, it is not told to you. You feel it. It's a sense you have. There's this noetic quality. It feels more real than real. So as you talk to people who have had near-death experiences, if you read their reports, they describe it not only as the most significant experience of their life, but they say it is the most real experience I have ever had. So this is not something you can easily dismiss when people are saying it was the most real experience they've ever had. and again, not a few people, but across the board. It is often accompanied, although not always, by a life review. In the life review, it is how your actions have affected other people. They don't do it as judgment or punishment. It is not presented to you as for judgment or punishment, but an aspect of growth to learn from it. And it is ineffable. It is described as ineffable. You can't describe it. There are no words to describe it. There is nothing that is adequate. It is a direct experience that you have had. It is prior to thought and language. The experience is felt. It is not thought intellectually. It is not seen. It is felt. Words fall short. It is often also accompanied by an out-of-body experience. where the person feels like they have, been lifted out of their body, rise up to the ceiling, they can fly around and they see what's going on in other places. I certainly did not have that experience. My feeling is that, not just because I didn't have that kind of experience, but my sense is that is not a critical component of the near-death experience. It is the first stage, typically the first stage of a near-death experience. When you read the accounts of people who've had it, it is what comes first, even before the tunnel. And as they have tried to check and verify what people say, there have been a few accounts where, yes, it's like they've been, seeing something and hearing what the doctors say, but it has also been disproven many times that what they think they have heard or report having heard or said, didn't really happen. So the near-death experience must include the other elements at the bottom: the light, the feeling of sacredness, the love, stuff like that. And the near-death, the out-of-body experience is really irrelevant to it. That's my sense. Are they real? Well, where do we go here? Oh, okay, yeah, this is just a summary of what some of the main characteristics are. Yeah, are they real? Well, it is a common experience. Estimates are anywhere from maybe 2% of the population up, in some cases, people say, like 30% of the people have experienced near-death experiences. Now, that depends what your definition is, because I think a lot of those people have had precisely the out-of-body experience that I described, but is not accompanied by some of the other sensations that are probably much more important to what I consider to be a near-death experience. But anyway, it is not something that is rare. Let's put it that way. It is not something that is extremely rare. It is common across all cultures. It is common across different religions, races. It is common across genders. It is common across income brackets. It is common among ages. I mean, even children have the experience. Children, blind people, deaf people, they all report the same type experience. The light, the love, the unconditional surrender. They all describe it as it's more real than real. And it is most profound, it is the most profound experience in the lives of many of these people. It has, children have reported it, and I believe that's fairly significant, if you want to say proof or evidence, because they've never heard of, you're talking about children 4 and 5 years old, they've never heard of, near-death experience, so it's not like they're repeating something they've heard before. They're less conditioned by religion and culture than adults, so for them to be saying some of these things is, why would that be happening if it didn't actually happen to them? Do they confirm life after death or God? Big question. This is where I could really step in some mud. So, for many people who've had the experience, yes, of course, that's what they say. Objectively, I believe the answer is no. I believe that someone's beliefs influence how they interpret the experience that they've had. Christians will, people who believe in Christ or Christians will tend to interpret their experience as they saw God, they saw Jesus. Some other religion will describe it some other way, but so I don't think that they literally are seeing God. Now, what are they seeing? I believe it's likely a physical explanation that can be explained in the brain. And I will go later, toward the end of the hour, I will touch on that. I will get to that. Nonetheless, near-death experiences do provide some kind of a glimpse of a deeper reality, no matter what you want to call it. If you want to call it a God, you want to call it what's happening in the brain, whatever it is, something is happening and you are getting some kind of a glimpse of something at least a little bit deeper. Do they confirm life? Do they confirm life after death? That's what I just said. Yeah. It's hard to read from there and hit the keys and whatever. Okay, so in my opinion, it's more about life because you're coming back to life, and it is more about life than it is about death or the afterlife. It's described as the most significant experience in people's lives. It has transformative effects on people. It gives them a meaning in life. They feel like they are part of something bigger. They become less self-centered. They become less materialistic. They are more patient, forgiving, compassionate, tolerant, more ethical. They tend to have more self-knowledge, more knowledge of themselves. They tend to be more responsible for themselves. There's less fear of death, as they come out of it. They are more accepting of adversity and uncertainty, hunger for knowledge, love of nature, and it tends to be more, provide psychological healing. And again, in the case of my near-death experience, I never had a suicidal thought after that. Not one single day in my life has it ever even crossed my mind again. One of the big lessons coming out of it is that life is all about love. That's what the whole thing is all about. Everything is intertied. We are part of that larger whole. And everything is made of the same stuff. Physical stuff, divine stuff, call it what you will. We're all made of the same stuff. And we're all intertied. And therefore, we need to love that whole thing. We need to love part of the process that we have been part of. Everything is united by love. And how do we practice it? We practice it through nonviolence, kindness, giving of oneself, using only what we need, and being mindful every moment. There's a sense that you understand the meaning of life. It's hard to describe what that meaning is. I came away, there was one point in the experience that I had that it said, the lesson I got, it's not like it said, nobody told me, but the feeling I had was, the answer is that there is no answer. As Gertrude Stein says. There is no answer. And that's the answer. And what's wrong with that? We accept, and I'm being a little bit facetious there, and I certainly can't say that I've lived my life that way through my life, but still, I can't explain it. You accept paradox and complexity. Life is messy. It's emotional, irrational, absurd, and life contains multitudes. It contains the evil as well as the sublime, or the evil as well as the good, the ugly as well as the beautiful and sublime, the mean as well as the compassionate. We ourselves are capable of any of those things. And that has always been a lesson that I have had, is it's one thing to call other people evil, and they're doing evil things, but you have to look at yourself and say, I am capable of the same stuff. We are all the same. Everything will be okay. This is one of my favorite slides. I love that. It's like, yeah, everything that happens as it should. And that's just a sense you come away with. It's just, it doesn't mean just accept everything and go along, but it just means like, well, this is life. Like you say, it's messy. Deal with it. Morality is not divinely ordained. That was also the sense that I came away with. We make our meanings. We make our meaning. Morality is either a social construct or it is evolved. Could be both, parts of both, but it is not divinely ordained. There's the karma of interconnectedness. Because we are all interconnected, on the one hand, it doesn't matter what we do to each other, the morality, whatever, but everything has consequences. No matter what we do, it's going to come back to us some way or the other. What I do affects other people. What goes around somehow comes around. So therefore, we have to take responsibility, and intention matters. There's less fear of death. there's a sense, as you come out of it, there's a sense that, been there, done that. Even though, and again, I'll touch on this, you haven't actually died, there's still that sense of, well, I can handle anything now. Everything's okay. Going back to that slide, everything's okay. It is as it should be. I can handle it. So you lose that kind of that fear of death. It's not going to be so bad. And there are pleasant associations because of some of those other sensations that accompanied the experience of light and love. You have a sense of liberation, of freedom. You are newly free. You question and reject authority a little bit more, again, because of the sense that you give your life meaning. And I have to stop a little bit and say, even though I'm talking about all this stuff, believe me, I don't do what I'm preaching here. So, is it proof of God? I believe there's a physical universe. God, if you want to say, in quotations, is the cosmos and the universe. It's made up of atoms. It comes from the Big Bang, and you can call that what you will. Whether that's God, whether it's just the cosmos, doesn't matter. But it is a oneness, and we are part of that oneness. And everything is part of that whole, and everything as a result is sacred. So, is that woo-woo? Is that belief? I don't know. But fundamentally, I believe, again, I come back to what I said earlier, I believe the experience is a physical experience that happens in the brain. And as I'll, again, get in, I believe it has a lot to teach us, but it is a physical experience that is happening in the brain. Is there an afterlife? Again, my answer to that is no. There is no, where am I here? There's no spirit. There's no spirit body going on. There's no ongoing consciousness. You don't live after death. You don't turn into some spirit in the ether. Your body, your mind, your soul does not live on. I just don't believe that. Nonetheless, there is a sense that we are part of a deeper reality. And perhaps our atoms are recycled. So is that an afterlife? Perhaps. And maybe because of quantum entanglement, we feel like, things like that happen. But I believe it has a physical basis in something like that. There's not some woo-woo thing going on. What about clairvoyance, precognition, seeing the future, extrasensory perception? Again, some people claim they have those powers because of this experience. I say that it's highly, highly, highly unlikely. People all the time, whether they've had a near-death experience or not, have the occasional correct intuition of something. That does not mean somebody has ESP or they're clairvoyant. It just happens randomly to all of us at times. That is different from saying that, you have some kind of extra powers. Perhaps you have a better understanding of human psychology as a result of the experience. And again, that does not mean that you have clairvoyance. So, near-death experiences have been common throughout history. Indigenous and ancient religions were grounded in near-death experiences. In Egypt, India, other places, they believed the soul leaves the body, travels to a dark place, through a dark place to a bright other realm. They are greeted by dead relatives. They undergo a life review, and they meet a being that is described as radiating light. Sound familiar? In ancient Egypt, they actually took initiates, the pharaohs and the priests, and sealed them in a coffin for 8 minutes to simulate death. And the idea was, the life would pass before them. They would, of course, be close to death. Life would pass before them, life review. Divine light would appear. They'd have contact with the infinite mind. And they would return transformed and spiritually reborn. And they did this because they felt that that made for a kinder, more compassionate leader. The Buddha. Now, did the Buddha have a near-death experience? I believe, if you read, or whatever, what happened, that he may have had a near-death experience. He certainly had a profound experience. But he was disillusioned. He had been searching for 6 years. He was disillusioned, empty, and despairing because he had been looking for the meaning of life for 6 years. And he vowed to sit for as long as necessary and sat under what's called the Bodhi tree for 49 days before finally he had his enlightenment experience. Was it the result of the near-death experience, or perhaps, again, as I'll get to, it was because of years of discipline? Plato describes in the Republic what was probably the first recorded near-death experience, where the warrior heir awoke after being dead for 12 days. He told of his visit to the afterworld. He flowed out of his body, saw heaven and hell. Life is determined by the choices we make, and he saw the oneness of all things. It's right there in the Republic. Conversion of Saul of Tarsus, St. Paul. Where he falls off the horse, and speaks of a man who was caught up in paradise. Was that himself that he's referring to? Says, whether it was in the body or not, I do not know. But I heard inexpressible things that no one is permitted to tell. The ineffability of the experience. Hieronymus Bosch, circa 1510, his famous painting, The Ascent of the Blessed. It looks a lot like a near-death experience. There's the tunnel, there's the light, there are the spirit guides, the angels, etc. And it was ineffable. He had to paint it. He couldn't talk about it. St. Teresa of Avila. Now, hers may have been related to epilepsy. A lot of people say that it was related to, that she was having epileptic seizures. Perhaps it was, or was it something because of her contemplative prayer and her devotion. Michel de Montaigne, French essayist, was thrown from a horse, floated on a cloud of pure light, which enlarged his conscience. Because of the fall, he was unconscious and returned with a new enlarged consciousness. He says he lost his fear of dying from that experience, and that death is part of the natural order. And he found his meaning and purpose in life as an essayist. Black Elk, the Lakota Sioux warrior. Nothing I have ever seen with my eyes was so clear and bright as what my vision showed me. No words that I have ever heard were like the words I heard. I do not have to remember these things. They have remembered themselves. Even now, I know that more was shown to me than I can tell. The ineffability of the experience. Carl Jung says to have had a near-death experience on a heart attack that he had several years before he actually died. He had the out-of-body experience that he describes, but he was bathed in a bright glow. He experienced everything I had ever done, the life review, sense of gratefulness, met spirit guides. And what happens after death, he says, is unspeakably glorious. Now he's talking there of perhaps an afterlife, which again, that's an interpretation that people put on after the fact. It is not necessarily what the experience itself is. And he said it was a glimpse behind the veil. I'll just go on there. A.J. Ayer, another 20th century philosopher, a logical positivist in the early part of the 20th century, early and mid part of the 20th century, was an atheist. His heart stopped, cardiac arrest for 4 minutes before he was brought back. Saw a bright light that is responsible for governing the universe. Felt a deep peace and love. It did not weaken his atheistic conviction. Again, how you interpret it, I think, depends a lot on what you've gone into it with. But he did say that it opened him to the possibility of an afterlife. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, somebody probably all heard of. Was a sickly child and had a close call with death when she was young. Then she did a bunch of relief work in the Nazi death camps and worked with the dying all her life and heard many testimonies of near-death experiences, which started to document the tunnel experience, the bright light, the cosmic consciousness, the love, stuff like that. Okay. Then we come to, and she was actually part of this, she lived until 2000 or something like that, or the 1990s, but in the 50s and 60s and 70s, we had an improvement in resuscitation science with the advent of CPR and with defibrillation. And even more recently now, where they can cool the body and keep the body alive for a longer period of time. That has meant that more people are being able to be revived and come back with these kinds of stories. You're hearing more stories now of near-death experiences. Raymond Moody then documented a large number of these cases in his book, which was the first one really to do so, in 1975, called Life After Life. It was, he was able to, he recorded people's stories and then went and kind of documented what some of the main features of the experience were. Kenneth Ring wrote a book. He is a psychologist at the University of Connecticut. He wrote a book called Heading Toward Omega. Kind of the same thing. He documented a lot of cases, but he went a little bit further and really said, not just, what are the common features of it, but the transformative effects that it had on people. And so his was the first book to really do that. To me, this was a seminal book. I really liked this book. Unfortunately, he subsequently veered off into other paranormal phenomenon, and I don't think was able to repeat what he was able to achieve in this book. Roger Ebert was a lifelong agnostic, the film critic. He had an enlightenment experience on his deathbed and talked about having visited this other place. He says this world is an illusion. I think he used the word hoax, actually. And that reality is a vastness that cannot be contained. It's everything, everywhere. Future and past dissolving in an eternal flash. Eckhart Tolle, kind of a more current, I don't know what you'd call him, philosopher, spiritualist. I mean, people give him all kinds of names. Buddhist. He was suicidal and was drawn into a vortex of energy. He was empty of himself. He awakened to a great light. The light was love itself, he says. He felt a deep peace and bliss, and everything was fresh and pristine. Anita Moorjani, probably no one heard of her. I read a book of hers called Dying to Be Me that I think, again, was one of the better accounts that I have read of near-death experience. She had lymphoma, her organs shut down, and she felt pure awareness, sacredness of everything, yada, 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 same stories. The next two are what I regard as probably two of the better recounts, and get a little bit more into some of the explanations for why it happens. Jill Bolte Taylor was a brain scientist. She had a massive stroke at the age of 37 years old and wrote this book called My Stroke of Insight about it afterwards. It took her a long time to recover. It took her about 8 years to actually get back to rebuild, after a stroke, to rebuild and be able to go back to work and live a normal life. But she describes her experience. She said she felt enormous and expansive, that she was gliding in a sea of silent euphoria. All I could detect was energy. Self-boundaries dissolved. She became or felt part of the universe, the oneness. And she subsequently wrote another book called Whole Brain Living that I also recommend to people. excellent book in terms of how to interpret what's going on in the brain and how to... Eben Alexander was a neurosurgeon. So again, Jill Bolte Taylor was a brain scientist, he is a neurosurgeon. So these people to be speaking of this with their scientific background, of the experiences that they had, I think lends import to the fact that this is a real experience that people feel. This is not a dream, this is not a hallucination that people are having. It is a real experience. It is something that is happening in the brain. You're not being transported to some other world. It's not about, the afterlife. You're not living in the afterlife. You're not going to God and coming back. It's something that is happening in the brain. It is physical and in the brain. And that's what these brain scientists say, these neurosurgeons. That's what's going on. He had bacterial meningitis and was in a coma for quite a period of time, 2 or 3 weeks. And he had what he recounts as a couple of what would be near-death experiences as a result, or during that period of time as his condition got worse. He said that love, his main lesson was that love is at the center of the universe. And you are loved and cherished, you have nothing to fear, and you can do nothing wrong. He reports, afterwards he felt much less materialistic. He was not after all the money that he was as a younger physician. And that this starts to get now into what is going on in the brain. He described it that the brain is like a filter, a reducing valve. It doesn't produce consciousness, it is a reducing valve. We get so much information in that we would be unable to live a normal everyday life. There's so much information in that if we are going to survive, there has to be some way to filter that information out. And that is the purpose of the brain. That is part of what a brain does. Not the only thing, but that is part of what a brain does. So it is the reducing valve. And as you go through this near-death experience, as you approach dying, the filter is weakened. You see through the filter and you're seeing something broader through all this other information. My third disclaimer, what is my third disclaimer? My examples that I gave, the examples that I gave are mostly from non-believers. There are plenty of other accounts from people who are believers, who are Christians. I don't resonate with that as much, so I don't tap into them. But there are thousands of other reports that are out there, if anybody wants to read any of those books or whatever, by both believers and non-believers. And they will both interpret it slightly differently in terms of, is there a God, is there an afterlife? But the fundamental core of the experience winds up being basically the same. So there was a film made in the 1990s called The Flatliners with Kevin Bacon, Julia Roberts, and Kiefer Sutherland. They are medical students and they experiment on each other. They're trying to find out what lies beyond death. And they induce death in themselves. They flatline for 90 seconds and then through the new resuscitation science, they resuscitate each other. Don't try this. Don't do it. Another fella tried to develop a God helmet, generating a weak magnetic field to stimulate the temporal lobe. His results, however, were very limited and basically unsuccessful. But people are trying to find ways to how can we do this experience. Then University of Barcelona in 2018 did a near-death experience virtual reality simulation where they tried to move subjects through the life cycle. They tried to simulate the out-of-body experience, the light, and the tunnel. And I don't know exactly how they did it. I read it once. Some of it I didn't understand. But the subjects came away with reports of good feelings. They didn't report near-death experience, not the intensity that you typically hear in other accounts. But they still reported good feelings and lasting positive changes. But again, not of the intensity and magnitude of people who've had the real experience. The main dismissals of near-death experiences are that it's a fabrication, a lie. I hope I've disabused that notion. That it's a hallucination or people are dreaming. Again, I hope I've disavowed that. Some say it's temporal lobe epilepsy. Well, there are too many cases of people that they're just not recording epilepsy. So it's not that. It's not universal enough. Perhaps it's oxygen deprivation to the brain. You're going into a REM sleep. Again, that held sway for a number of years, but I think that has mostly been rejected as a hypothesis anymore, simply because what I'll show on the next slide is there is actually an increase in brain activity, in the gamma wave activity that's happening in the brain, not a decrease that occurs in the oxygen deprivation and the REM sleep. And the other is that it's the adaptation of a dying brain, to help people navigate the process of dying, going through death. It relieves the pain. But the question is, how would that have ever evolved if people are not coming back from death? There are not enough people coming back with a near-death experience. How would they pass that trait along? And they just are unable to account for that. So what are possible explanations for the near-death experience? Well, dualism, the separation of mind and body, of spirit and body, that there's some spirit world out there. I don't believe it. It's something that's going on within the brain. But still, some people hold to that. Panpsychism, which is the idea that there is a field of consciousness out there. And again, this starts to sound woo-woo, and I don't understand this myself. But it is something that a lot of serious people are exploring and looking at, that there is a field of consciousness out there and that we somehow tap into it. Thirdly, where I come out a little bit more is on these last three, that there's some kind of a disinhibition that may be going on, that the brain filters are deactivated, that there are neuroelectrical surges or possibly even quantum entanglement of some sort. Sam Parnia provides the best plausible explanation in my mind. He is an intensive care doctor at NYU. He describes himself as a non-believer. He says because more people are being revived, you're hearing a lot more reports about near-death experiences. And reports the similar type things, of love, oneness, karma, etc. And he has gone through, he's done some natural language processing, which is basically AI looking at the patterns of language that people use when they describe these experiences. And they look at patterns and statistics and underlying semantics, and they're able to come up with the conclusion that these are real, that they're different from dreams and hallucinations, and that they are real, and that there is a commonality among people. So before I get into his final conclusion, there is evidence, fairly recent evidence, that the brain remains functional for an interval after death. Functionality has been observed in decapitated pigs, where they take decapitated pigs 4 hours after they have been decapitated, and they're able to restore a reasonable level of functionality in those brains. They've also done similar things with monkeys and rats. Not decapitated, but been able to restore some kind of brain functionality for some period after they have been reported dead. There are then, in 4 patients, this is just a couple of years ago now, they were actually able to take 4 patients who were dying and were taken off of ventilation that was supporting their lives. And they measured bursts of gamma activity in their brain waves. Now, the gamma activity is the highest form of brain wave, or the highest frequency. And it is typically associated with heightened awareness. It has been measured in Buddhist monks, where they go into a deep meditation and they've got the EEGs on their head, and they're able to measure, gamma activity, gamma wave activity. And that is what they are finding in the dying patients, people who are dying, is this burst. It's not a continual thing, it's bursts. It's bursts. So is it being stored somewhere? They don't know the details, but there are these bursts of gamma activity. And what that also does is it increases the connectivity between the left and the right hemispheres of the brain. So coming back to Sam Parnia, he says that there's a gray zone between life and death. And there's this electrical discharge to the brain that I talked about. As a result, the disinhibitions are removed. Senses are shut down, so you're not getting outside information, but you've got this burst of activity, and it translates into some kind of a hyper-consciousness, a feeling of peace, which are byproducts of what is going on through this gamma activity, unassociated with the physical stimulation of the senses, which you're no longer receiving. And you get this activity going on in the brain. So that is where I come out on it. So Sam Parnia says, it may be that as multiple parts of the brain are shutting down with death, this leads to disinhibition of other areas that help humans gain insights into other dimensions of reality that are otherwise less accessible. I think this is my last slide. No, well, close. Our near-death experience is real. Again, I believe it's physical. It's something that is happening in the brain, as I described. They are not rare. They are the same across cultures. There are real-world consequences for the experiencer. And in my mind, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, quacks like a duck, does it reflect what happens when one dies? Well, we'll never know for sure. Is it a near-death experience? Again, the outward signs, the breath, the heart rate have stopped. But there is some kind of a brain activity. So are they dead or not? We have an arbitrary definition of death, of when exactly it happens. So these people haven't really died. There's still some kind of activity that is going on at some level. Nonetheless, it is a profound, profound experience. Is it a harbinger of what we'll experience when we die? Like I say, we just don't know, because nobody has really come back from death. They come back from near death, which is something different. And another, I have to, this gets a little gruesome, but it kind of highlights the point, I think, is what happens if some big monster comes along and steps on us and squishes us like we step on an ant and squishes them. You have instant death. Boom, you're gone. Or people who take a gun and blow their brains out. There is no transition to death. There is no brain holding itself together. What happens? Which again, to me, kind of points to the idea that this is not about seeing God. This is not about an afterlife. It's not like, it's something that just happens in the brain. And it teaches us more about life than it teaches us about death. The brain filters information by what is useful in order to live our daily lives. Our ego is what results. The near-death experience cracks through the ego defenses and exposes us to more information. It broadens our experience. But it is not necessarily total. We don't know that. So imagine the woman here looking through that crack. Is she seeing the universe? Is she seeing ultimate reality? Well, she's seeing something outside of her normal daily experience, but it doesn't mean it's ultimate reality, even though that is what a lot of people report and experience. And from the experience that I had, I would say that, yeah, I probably fell into that trap for many years as well. but it doesn't mean it's ultimate reality. But it is more than what we normally experience. And that, by itself, can be enlightening. And it is sensed as profound. So, what are we doing for time? Okay, take questions. Please be gentle. I put a lot of heart and soul into doing this, and I was very, very reluctant to do it, and so.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Dean. There's one slide there that I was a little confused about. You had Elizabeth somebody there.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross?
Yeah, and the picture that went along with it, was that her? Because it looked like a guy.
Yeah, that was her.
Huh. Okay. Just wondered.
Yep, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Yeah, she wrote a number of books. Can't even think of the names of them, but she wrote a number of books in the 70s and 80s. It was pretty popular. She was a hospice worker, one of the first real proponents for hospice care.
Ava Dittler. Ava Dittler.
Can't hear you.
My name's Ava Dittler. You didn't discuss this at all, but of all the research you've done on these experiences, the people that come back from these experiences, have any of them did you read about any of them having disassociation or depersonalization issues when they came back?
Depersonalization or what?
Disassociation. No.
Not in those terms, not in those words. So they report losing their ego, but always in a good sense. I mean, they feel like they've broken through some boundaries of their ego and have become selfless and egoless, but I don't know if that's quite what you're talking about.
Hi, John, this is Joan. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Ladies first. I'm sorry. I am my mother's child.
Well, thank you very much. If I could curtsy, I would, and it would look so much better if I wore a skirt. But hi, John, this is Joan. Thank you. It's very interesting. You make a distinction between near-death experiences and dreams or hallucinations by calling the near-death experiences real. But I'm not and then, it's all about brain activity. Well, dreams and hallucinations are about brain activity. So I'm not sure what you mean by real and whether, I'm not sure what you mean by real, I guess. Because I think dreams are real.
People who have dreams and hallucinations do not report that they are real, most of the time. There are occasions, I'm not going to say they don't, but they don't report them as real. They know there's a distinction, that they dreamt something. Whereas people with a near-death experience, it's like, it's real. I mean, they feel it is the most real thing they have ever experienced. And people who've had a near-death experience have also had dreams and hallucinations, and they call their near-death experience vastly different. Secondly, is dreams and hallucinations are all over the board. Your dream is not the same as my dream. Your dream tonight is not the same as it was last night. The near-death experiences are basically the same experience that people are having.
Brad, statistically, we receive all of the reports about the positive experience. Is there any analysis of individuals who go through the same physiological process
and do not have a near-death experience? We know the numerator because they've had the experience. The denominator is much larger than that. What happens to the other proportion who go through the same process? That doesn't get reported, I know. But
yeah, they don't report them. It doesn't mean, I'm not saying that everybody who dies has a near-death experience. That is not the case. It is a brain thing. It is triggered by some kind of brain activity, and no one has been able to identify any kind of circumstances under which it's triggered. So it's hard, and there have not been comparative studies done, of course. But yes, a lot of people die, they do not have those experiences. Now, I don't know if that's the question you're asking. The other flip side of the question, I'm not sure, maybe you were trying to get at, is do some people have negative experiences? And there have been a few, yes, there are some cases where people have a near-death experience or report something along those lines, but they don't report all these positive symptoms. They report it as, they went somewhere else and basically met Satan or something, and, it was a living hell, so to speak. But those are rare. Those cases are rare, are vastly outnumbered by the number of positive cases. And then, of course, I say there are just many people who die and or come back, take that back, not die, have had a near-death experience, are resuscitated and come back, and yes, they did not have the same experiences. Yeah, probably more people. In fact, the NYU guy, Sam Parnia, says of the cardiac patients that he has analyzed, of the ones who have returned, there were like 567 he studied, about 80 of them returned, and about 30 some of them reported a near-death experience. So more than half did not report a near-death experience of any sort.
Hi, it's Bonnie. Hey, I really appreciate the courage that you have to present these personal beliefs. I'm impressed with that. I'm curious, when you first described this near-death experience, it sounded just like an ecstasy trip to me. I don't know how many people have experienced that, maybe not very many, but I have. And I'm just curious how much, you said that also some of these monks who were meditating had kind of a very similar brain experience, and I'm wondering if there is evidence out there that drugs can also simulate the same kind of brain activity and the same kind of near-death experience.
Stay tuned for part 2.
Okay.
Because here, it's part 3. So the second hour, I'll talk about mystical experiences, religious mystical, transcendent mystical experiences, and then psychedelic experiences, psychoactive substances. So.
Okay, one more question? Okay, one more.
This is Ken. I read about an experience after death, if you will, or brain. During the French Revolution, a man who knew he was to be beheaded made arrangements to communicate with his friend by blinking once for yes, twice for no. The friend got the severed head and asked, "Can you hear me?" One blink. "Does it hurt?" No response. So brain was communicating for just a little while.
Okay, part 2 will commence at 11:12. See you in 10 minutes.
11:10. Part 2, I'll focus more on the more typical mystical experience as reported by mystics, and then psychedelic experiences, and try to see if there's an overlap. And try to see if there's an overlap with the near-death experience. Okay, what does it say? More spiritually enlightened or less spiritually enlightened? With the optometrist. So, the mystical experience. Let me just a real quick preface. When I described the near-death experience that I had, I didn't know what to make of it. When it had happened to me, I didn't know what to make of it. You know, I'm 20 years old or thereabouts, and I'd never experienced anything like it, and I had mentioned something or parts of it to one or two people, and they look at you like, you're crazy. Well, that fall I went back to school, and one of the courses that I took was the literature of religious experience. And we read the Upanishads, Hindu, and we read the Tao Te Ching and Bhagavad Gita, and a lot of stuff by Buddha and some Zen Buddhism, and then of course the Christian mystics, St. John of the Cross, Meister Eckhart, Teresa of Avila, and a little bit of Thomas Merton. So that kind of is a background, a segue, I suppose, a little bit to what I'm going to get into here. So what is a mystical experience? Well, a mystical experience, people have a lot of different definitions of it. The one that I'm using, it is an experience of union with or direct apprehension of ultimate reality. And again, I temper that in the long run. I temper that with one of my last slides where it's like you're seeing a glimpse of something outside of our ordinary experience. And we mistake it for ultimate reality, but it still is a glimpse of something that is profound and way bigger than we experience in our daily, ordinary lives. So this definition comes kind of a combination of the two dictionaries and one or two other sources, and I kind of paraphrased. They were all pretty similar, and that's what I came up with. Evelyn Underhill was one of the first people to really study mystical experiences back in the early 1900s. She published this book, Mysticism, in 1910 or 1911. She says mysticism is union with reality and, above all else, a science of love. William James, about the same time, wrote his book, Varieties of Religious Experience, where he talks about it being a direct experience prior to thought or belief. You are experiencing before there are words to it. You are having the experience. The words come later. Again, he described 4 qualities to the experience, one of which is the direct experience. Another was ineffability. Thirdly it was noetic, meaning more real than real. And the fourth one was something to do with transiency, that it happens randomly. It happens randomly with no control. It just happens. There's nothing you can do about it. You can meditate, you can pray, you can do whatever you want, and there's no guarantee it's ever going to happen. And it just may strike you out of the blue. Nonetheless, he found that it is, with the people who report it, that it has a primary source of enduring transformation in their lives. The main characteristics of the mystical experience look a lot like the characteristics of a near-death experience, minus the tunnel experience, minus the out-of-body experience, although even there, some of them, like Teresa of Avila, did report out-of-body experiences, but it is not as common. The life review, and because in some sense they're not dying when this happens, and it would make sense they don't have the life review, and they don't make the clear decision to return. That often happens in a near-death experience. But otherwise, most of the other stuff is basically the same experience. Experiences of Christian mystics are similar to the near-death experience again, and they experience the transcendence, the profundity. It's such a profound experience. They report the ecstasy, the filled with love, the joy, the awe, the bliss, the unity, the oneness. Very common. But it is interpreted through Christian lenses. They saw God, or they saw Jesus, or talked with them. And they take it as proof of, there is proof of God, or it is proof of an afterlife. So again, in that sense, those are interpretations that come afterward. The experience itself before the interpretation is basically the same experience. The mystical experience is common among world religions. Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they all have their mystics, and they all report a oneness with being. They report how sacred it is, love, selflessness. Mystical experiences are often seen by many scholars and academics as being the origin of religion, the origin of a lot of our religions. They are founded on a direct experience. Somebody has had a direct experience that is so profound that they attract people to them. People follow them. And therefore, you have the beginnings of a religion. Then, of course, they begin to pile things on, and because people don't experience the near-death experiences, they give lessons. Well, you should do this, you should do that. You come up with your eightfold path, or you come up with your 10 commandments, or you do this or that, and then things get more and more ritualized, and pretty soon you just have this ossification, this religion that is a stricture rather than an opening to the direct experience, which is what it originally was founded on. Religions were established to make the experience more accessible to others, and yet they wind up becoming a straitjacket. And some of the direct experience that you could say that have been stifled by established religions were the Native American ghost dance, Mayan use of ayahuasca. The Mayans used it before the arrival of the Spanish, and Christian mystics who were quashed in the 1700s and through the Inquisition and other experiences. Who has had mystical experiences? Here's a list. I'll let you, just scan that real quickly, but I take a drink of water. Thomas Aquinas, of all people, who wrote about, how many angels could dance on the head of a pin? Well, I can write no more, he says. I have seen things which make all my writings like straw. Because he had what was described as a mystical experience. William Blake had a number of mystical or near mystical experiences. Of course, in those days they didn't have the definitions they do now to really try to put it in a box. But he just encapsulates it so well, I think. To see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower. To hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Wow. And I'm not much of a poet, believe me. And I don't appreciate it that much, but some things just resonate. If the doors of perception were closed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through narrow chinks in his cavern. Again, that image of seeing through the curtain to something beyond. Am I coming through on the speaker okay? Krishnamurti, a 20th century Indian mystic, described a profound sense of unity and clarity in an experience he had. It was deep and unshakable silence. There was a dissolution of his ego. He had no sense of self, had a supreme feeling of joy, and said, I had seen, nothing could ever be the same. And try to see without words. Again, such an image. Try to see without words. Thomas Merton, another 20th century mystic, born around 1920 or thereabouts, died in 1968 from an electrical shock at a monastery in Thailand or Vietnam or somewhere on a trip to Asia to meet with the Tibetan monks over there. And he had a conversion experience, a sudden mystical experience in downtown Louisville. And they have a plaque commemorating it. And he describes his experience in one of his books. Those are sudden flashes of insight that a lot of those Christian mystics talked about. Some of these people had. Similar to a near-death experience, they were this sudden flash of insight, a bolt of lightning, so to speak. But perhaps there's a second kind of mystical experience, something that is gradual and sustained. Because many people that we call mystics, and I will show a couple of them here, never described a mystical experience, and yet their writings, their writings are such that they are called mystics by other people because they express the same profound sentiments. So there's no comprehensive experience. They don't have a one-time flash of lightning. Rather, they have one or numerous small epiphanies. Not some grand insight, but a little insight, another little insight, another little insight of peace or serenity and love or something else. And there's a way of, people have this, when they do years of practice or training, they may kind of have some of these insights through their practices. It is a mystical sentiment, as Einstein described it, not an experience. And the conclusions are similar, the conclusions they come up with are similar to the near-death and sudden mystical experiences. They all talk about selflessness equating with enlightenment. Enlightenment appears when you stop wanting. If you could get rid of yourself, the secret of secrets would appear. That was Rumi, the Islamic philosopher, mystic. An emptying of selfhood allows the soul to attach to reality. Rabbi Kushner. You can achieve ego dissolution through a focused practice. A number of different religions do that. Whether it's Buddhist, they talk of a no permanent self, taming the ego, losing the self. The Hindu, where the small self becomes the big self by shedding their illusions. Christians, dying to the self. Or Sufism, where they talk of annihilation of the self. Again, the brain serves as a filter. I talked about this on the near-death. I thought I had this in the other presentation. That's why I talked about it. Culture filters raw experience. And of course, that enhances survival. We have to do that if we're going to survive. Imagine if we were all blissed out all the time in the good old days of 1968 and 69, Because of that culture, we have a sense of self, of separateness. We are separate people, separate egos. I am this. You are that. We use artifacts, we use language, beliefs, art, structured thought, and all kinds of customs are ways to structure our experiences. But to have these mystical experiences, you bypass all those filters somehow. And that's where you go through the dissolution of the ego. All religions have the intent and means to quiet the ego, whether it's meditation, contemplative prayer, solitude, work, focused work, not just your job work, but a focused kind of work, a charitable work, service to others. And in Gandhi's case, satyagraha, where at some point, you have to merge those. You have to merge contemplation and action. So there are two slow paths. One is the discipline, the contemplation and the action. It's turning inward. The other path is turning outward. To lose yourself, you don't just have to meditate, perhaps. You can lose yourself, the dissolution of the ego, by doing outside work, by working for other people, by losing yourself in service, so to speak. Both of them quiet the ego. And you need both, ultimately, contemplation and action to have a full life. Contemplation without action, contemplation without action kind of becomes narcissistic, and action without contemplation can lose its way. What are you doing it for? You need the grounding. It loses its grounding. Walt Whitman may be one who had the slow type of mystical experiences. He's never reported a sudden enlightenment experience, so to speak. But again, his words, a leaf of grass is no less than the journey work of the stars. That's what it's all about. It's the big picture. Ralph Waldo Emerson, uplifted into infinite space, all mean egotism vanishes. I become transparent. I am nothing. I see all. The currents of the universal being circulate through me. I am part or particle of God. T.S. Eliot, again, I am not much of a poet. I don't appreciate a lot of poetry, but T.S. Eliot is one, particularly his 4 quartets, just resonated with me. At the still point of the turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless, neither from nor towards, at the still point, there the dance is. Except for the point, the still point, there would be no dance. And there is only the dance. It is not just writers, physicists, scientists. Again, they don't report the sudden flashes of mystical experience, but so many of them resonate with the same sentiment, the mystical sentiment, as opposed perhaps to the experience. Einstein was one. Through my pursuit in science, I have known cosmic religious feelings. He saw the quest to unify physics, relativity and quantum physics, and to unite humanity in peace as one single spiritual quest. He said that freeing oneself from the delusion of separateness is the key issue of religion, and that our destiny is to experience ourselves as an element of the eternal. He regretted not having read the mystics earlier in his life. Let's see, where was I going on this one? Both physics and mystical experience. If I talk about it, maybe I'll remember what I meant about it. Both are about the nature of reality. Okay, physics and mystical experience are both about the nature of reality, and they both reach similar conclusions. We belong to the universe. We are interconnected. We are all one. It is all paradoxical, and it is indeterminate. It's uncertain. We don't know where we're going. There's a quantum connection with a lot of the Eastern religions. Quite a connection between the quantum scientists and physicists with Eastern religion. Niels Bohr said that Buddha and Lao Tzu faced the same epistemological problems that he faces in his physics. Wolfgang Pauli had a background in Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching. Erwin Schrödinger read the Vedas, the Hindu mystical scriptures, and said, you are a part of an eternal, infinite being. And Robert Oppenheimer is famous for having read and cited often the Bhagavad Gita as his favorite book. Things mistaken for mystical experience? Well, there's a lot of them. And not all of them bad. I don't mean to say that all of them are bad. The conversion experience. Is that really a mystical experience? Rapture. Yeah. A eureka moment. Well, is a eureka moment part of, a small epiphany that accumulated, they will lead to a mystical, mystical sentiment? Maybe. You're getting closer. Same with the out-of-body experience. Not really. I don't believe so. But the three in particular where, I think it, that really starts to border on the mystical experience, but not quite, are the flow state, the book Flow by Sigmund Thaler, from 20 or 30 years ago, peak experience, as described by Abe Maslow, or nature mysticism. In terms of the rapture, of course, there are always the false prophets. They are the people to watch out for, the messianics, the people who say that they are God, or that God has talked to them and given them special information or special instructions. And they have led to some big disasters in history. And they don't have to be people like this. It can happen at a small scale. They don't have to be your Jim Jones and Charles Mansons. The flow experiences are creative moments of artistic beauty, natural beauty. It happens a lot in sports where you're in the zone. Or falling in love is perhaps similar to a flow experience, as opposed to big picture love of humanity that I described in the previous hour. Abe Maslow talks about peak experience. Is that a mystical experience? Again, I think it falls a little bit short, but it is certainly on the path. He describes his peak experience as moments of highest happiness and fulfillment. Again, not quite reaching that level that we talked about of joy and bliss, of being in love, not of being immersed in love, of being transported by a piece of music or art, which is great, but it's not the infinite, the sense of infiniteness and love. The creative moment, the feeling whole, self-sufficient, alive. Those are a little bit short of what I talked about on the near-death experience in the last hour, and that what the other Christian mystics talked about, and Buddhist mystics. So what I believe that he's missing from his pyramid, which is great up to a point, is there should be one more level up there that branches out, instead of in at the top, but branches out, of self-transcendence. Almost mystical experiences, there they are. I think a lot of art, a lot of music, nature mysticism, being in nature, can induce very profound and meaningful experiences in people. But again, they fall short. They are almost mystical experiences. They are not holy. They are not sacred. They are not necessarily transcendent. They do not talk about oneness with God or the universe. They are not the most important experience in one's life. So while they are important, I don't mean to dismiss them. They are not the same thing. Peak experience here, I compare the peak experience to the near-death experience. In the peak experience, you have this immersion in music or art. You're transported by a piece of music or art. The near-death experience it's transcendent. The peak experience is you're one with something concrete. You feel emerging, but it's with something concrete. The mystical experience, the near-death experience, is you're one with everything, with the universe. Peak experiences, you see specific truths, not ultimate reality. Peak experience says, has an experience perhaps of light, but it is not immersive. You feel light and warm, but it's not immersive like in the near-death experience. There are feelings of love and warmth, but not ecstatic love and joy and bliss. Or you regard it as an important experience in your life. It taught you something, but it is not necessarily the most profound experience of your life. Okay, that's it on the mystical experiences. It's ironic because mystical experiences have the longest recorded history. You probably have, most cases of people who, or I shouldn't say the most, but there's so many people who have written about mystical experiences, and yet I have the least to say about it, perhaps because of that. One could go on for a long time, take a whole course on it. Now we get to the really, 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 really fun part. Okay, everybody, close your eyes. I want everybody to close their eyes. Okay. How many of you took LSD when you were younger?
Are we supposed to raise our hands?
Yes, raise your hands. Okay, now stand up and do a dance. Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, I didn't want everybody to see who did and who didn't, but now I know, and I got, I can, okay, where am I? Here I am. Okay, psychedelics, are they entheogens? Entheogens means a substance that induces some kind of a theogenic, whatever that means, experience, spiritual experience of some sort, a profound, transformative, transcendent experience. There are a whole number of them, but three of the most common ones, and whose experiences most resemble a mystical experience or a near-death experience, are psilocybin, which is a mushroom, ayahuasca, which comes from a vine in Central and South America, and mescaline, which is from peyote, mescaline or peyote, which is from a cactus. And they have been used for centuries by indigenous people for healing and for spiritual purposes. They have also been used in more recent times for other recreational purposes. Psychedelics have a long history in religions. Early wine and beer appeared to have been laced with psychoactive substances. Of the wine and the beers that they made in those days from barley, for the beer, they didn't have the processing procedures that they do now, and they tended to be much more dilute and weaker than what we buy off our shelves today. Instead, they were laced with various psychoactive substances. And this is from this book, or I've read some other sources as well, but mostly from this book, The Immortality Key. Psychoactive substances are removed by many early religions for a direct experience of something transcendent and to get a message of love, unity, and sacredness. And they made ritual use of it in the mysteries of Eleusis, which lie in Kukian, which was a psychoactive wine that they added some, they believe, mushrooms similar to psilocybin to it. And leaders would visit Eleusis to experience goodness. The Eleusinian mysteries. Now, Eleusis is part of the Greek, it's just north of Greece, probably in the Macedonia area or whatever. It was a mystery cult. They would drink this wine infused with ergot, a fungus, something rotten, and it induced a psychedelic experience. They used it to gain some secret knowledge, and it was used like the Egyptians, where they put the people in the coffin for 8 minutes. They used it for society's elite. Not everybody could do this. It was for the elite, so that they could have this transcendent, transformative experience. Again, hopefully with the idea that coming out of it, they would be a better leader for their society. Some of the initiates included Marcus Aurelius, famous Roman emperor, Cicero, and it's speculated that Plato was one of the initiates also. Central America, you see all these mushroom statues, which suggest that they used psychoactive substances. in particular between about 500 BCE to 1400 CE, till the arrival of the Spanish, who were threatened by this secret knowledge, this special knowledge that they gained from their psychedelics that they took. It's one of the more fun ones, the stoned ape theory. An ethnobotanist, Terence McKenna, has a theory that our large brains are due largely to psychedelic mushrooms. That taking the psychedelic mushrooms improved our visual acuity, our attention, and our energy levels. That it increased our libido. And going back to the 1960s, maybe people can relate to that. Increased social bonding, feelings of social bonding, and it triggered language regions in the brain. And so he believes that these things wound up having an effect in making for the larger brains. He also believes, of course, which we already touched upon, that it drove the human religious impulse and was, kind of the foundation of a lot of religions. LSD was first fabricated in 1943, synthesized in 1943 by a Swiss chemist, Albert Hofmann. He was tasked with synthesizing natural medicinal plants. The intent was to try to help deal with psychosis and schizophrenia. And that was the original intent. And he stumbled, in his explorations, upon LSD. His chief psychiatrist said, "I seem to have finally arrived at the contemplation of eternal truth." So it had a profound effect on the people who developed it, and in those days, of course, they would experiment on themselves. Aldous Huxley was probably one of the first people to really popularize the use of LSD. He wrote his book, The Doors of Perception, and followed it with another book some years later, The Perennial Philosophy, which talked again about the commonality of this experience among the different cultures and religions of the world. And he described it again, as we've talked about, as the brain is a filter and a reducing valve, and that the psychoactive substances help you break through that filter and experience some kind of a wider glimpse of what is going on out there. Interesting story is he had his wife inject him with LSD on his deathbed. So, what a way to go out. There's the Harvard Psilocybin Project by Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, who subsequently became Ram Dass. This was in 1961 or 62 on the it was actually at Boston University, even though they were Harvard professors. They did this experiment there. They brought together, they had 167 subjects in all. And 95% who took the LSD said it changed their life for the better. They did a subset of that experiment. And that was a longer running experiment. It wasn't just a one-time thing. They continually did it with people. This was 1962. This is the one I was thinking of. 1962, the Marsh Chapel experiment, otherwise referred to as the Good Friday experiment. How many of you have ever heard of this? No. One person. Okay. It was part of the Harvard Psilocybin Project, and this was the one that was done at Boston University. And they took 20 Boston area divinity students and gave them LSD. And like 12 or 13, half of them were given LSD and half of them were given a placebo. 25 years later, the ones who were given the LSD all said that they had genuine mystical elements, mystical experiences, and that it was the high point in their spiritual life. One of them was Houston Smith, who I'll get to in a moment. He has written several books, one of which is kind of a famous book, The Religions of the World, that has been used in university classes for years. And I think even to this day is still used quite a bit. Another person was I believe, I don't know if he was part of this group or if he was part of the 167 kind of at large who took it, but a professor of mine back at the University of Wisconsin was an Episcopalian priest, and he never said directly that he took it, but he referred to several things, including this Good Friday experiment, that leads me to believe that he was one of these participants, and he was quite a person. In fact, he was the one who taught the course, the literature and literature of religious experiences that I talked about earlier. Houston Smith wrote this book, The Religions of Man, if they've ever read it or seen it. He was a divinity student, a participant in the Good Friday experiment. How am I doing for time? Not good. Well, he had a lot of things to say about it. So, said it was the most powerful cosmic homecoming he'd ever had. And okay. Roland Griffiths, Johns Hopkins University psychedelic researcher, did early work on addictive mood-altering drugs, but then developed an interest in psilocybin to treat depression, anxiety, addiction, stuff like that. And has come to the conclusion that it produces significant meaning and spiritual apprehension in people. They have given it to religious leaders, similar to the Harvard experiment, where they gave LSD and psilocybin to religious leaders. And all but the Buddhists had a divine encounter. And the Buddhists said, because they don't believe in God per se, like the other religions, which all said they basically saw God and talked to God and yada yada. The Buddhist said he experienced a realm beyond concept. So, very similar, but I like the way they word it. God was a presence, not embodied. And so, there's Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who escaped Vichy, France in 1941, very influential worldwide Jewish leader, became friends in Boston area with Ram Dass, Richard Alpert. Tried LSD with Timothy Leary and said it was better than schnapps. However, he always took it, he said, for spiritual reasons, not religious, or not recreational reasons. And he would take it before Yom Kippur and Passover, and loved the sacramental value of LSD. Michael Pollan, author of How to Change Your Mind, as well as many other books, a Harvard professor, has tried 4 different kinds of psychedelics. And his description is, he says it quiets the default mode network. The default mode network is the area of our brain that is scanning. When we're not focused on a task, we're scanning the environment for clues, for things that are interesting, different things that are going on. And he says it quiets that network so that you can focus, and the ego then is transcended. He says it can rewire the brain, and it has therapeutic uses. Oh, I thought I had another one in here now. Then we get into some of the scientists. Carlo Rovelli is a physicist. He became a physicist because of an LSD trip that he had, which triggered questions about the nature of reality to him. It changed his perceptions, and he saw the oneness of the world. He said all reality is interaction. Fritjof Capra is another person, high-energy physicist, and has drawn connections between theoretical physics and Eastern mysticism. And he was helped by the power of plants. And he said Werner Heisenberg, the famous physicist, was in complete agreement. So, because they worked together. This man, Christopher Bakke, took 73 LSD trips. between 1979 and 1999. I'm amazed he's still acute enough, mentally alert enough to talk about it, but he is an atheist. He takes it only in a guided circumstance in a safe and natural setting, so he doesn't just take it recreationally. And he says, through the guides, he has been able to continue to open to deeper and deeper levels of consciousness. That we all dissolve into a galactic mind, a collective unconscious, and return to our common origins. He says the goal of life is to let in as much love, intelligence, and wisdom as possible. This is the one I thought after Michael Pollan about therapeutic uses. It is used you're experimenting with LSD and psilocybin for therapeutic uses. It's called microdosing. They give them microdoses. 13 to 26 milligrams, typically a tab of LSD is 100 to 200 milligrams. So they're giving a much lower dose to people to try to treat. It facilitates the release of oxytocin and increased pro-social feelings and feelings of compassion and kindness. And it is given to, they're experimenting with alcoholics, substance abusers, and veterans who've had PTSD. Unfortunately, the results have been mixed and mediocre. They have not been robust. Conclusions, near-death experience, and conclusions of the whole talk, not just the latter part. Near-death experiences are real, they're universal, they're profound, they're life-changing. Something's happening in the brain, and it changes people's lives. There is a similarity between near-death experiences and mystical experiences. Psychedelic experiences appear to be much more random and varied. They can trigger a similar experience, but they often produce other kinds of hallucinogenic experiences, and in some cases, negative experiences. We have little or no control over when these experiences happen. We cannot count on them happening through discipline or training. They may or they may not. They just come when they come. The surest option, though, is some kind of disciplined action. Even it gives you those small bursts of insight that cumulatively can still have the profound effect on your life. The main takeaways: oneness, feeling of oneness, and a feeling of be here now. Unjustified conclusions, I've done those, won't go through that. Pathways to mystical experiences, they can be induced by death or near death, but who wants to risk death, to get this experience? Can be religiously induced through years of practice, devotion, discipline. But even then, success is not guaranteed. Or you can do the quick fix of your psychoactive substances. But again, it's quick, and they're more risky and a lot more mixed results. Quieting the ego, we'll go past that. Main types of mystical experiences, they can be slow and limited. Sudden, but a limited experience, like a peak experience, a flow experience, art, nature. A sudden and full experience, both sudden and full, which could be the full near-death experience, a sudden or transcendent experience, or sometimes with the psychoactive substance, and sometimes sudden but limited or distorted, which you'll get more in the psychoactive substances. Looking at it slightly differently, the traditional spiritual life is slow and gradual with discipline and practice. The peak or flow experience, or nature mysticism, can be sudden, but it is much more limited in scope. The near-death and mystical experience is sudden and transcendent, and psychedelics can be sudden, but limited in scope or distorted. So just looking, those two slides are the same, but just looking at it slightly differently. There's an overlap between experiences, quite an overlap between near-death and mystical experiences, but on the outside you see some of the other experiences. OBE is out-of-body experiences. And this is the last slide. There is a continuum of experiences, from the ones that I consider not anything related, which are the full experience, the fabrication, the hallucination, the out-of-body experience. Then you proceed up to the peak and flow experience, the art and nature, nature mysticism or artistic insights, musical, the partial near-death experience, and finally the transcendental experience. And hopefully there's no time for questions. No. 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Time for 4 questions. Well, they can come afterwards for questions too. Yeah, you can come afterwards, but there are some questions. Is that a stretch or is that a hand up over there?
That's
So this is Mark. And John, it's said that, most religions try to get people into heaven, and spirituality is about getting heaven into people. And I wonder, to that extent, is there a preponderance of these mystical experiences being driven by spiritual pursuit or religiosity? And then one correction, you had a slide on Messianic cult leaders, and you missed a really current, prominent example.
Yeah, I missed one, didn't I? As to your first question, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, it's really the simple fact of the matter. Yeah, I don't know the answer. If there is an answer. Any other questions? One more question if somebody has something. I'll stay up here for a few minutes if somebody wants to come up, but thank you very much.